In a small room with floral yellow wallpaper, two people stood. A short, grey-haired woman with hard features, an aquiline nose and thin lips. A heavy, coarse necklace on her chest bounced every time she opened her mouth to utter sharp, stinging words. "You understand, don't you, David, that we can't go on living like this?" the woman demanded, tossing her head. "She's in our way." The man looked at his mother, a mix of defiance and guilt on his soft face. His hands hung limply by his sides, and his eyes fixed on anything but her. "She's my wife, Mum. How can you not understand?" The woman threw her hands up and scoffed. "Oh, don't give me that wife nonsense. You wouldn't have strayed if she meant anything to you. And I refuse to keep cleaning up after her. She's a vegetable, and you heard what the doctor said. She won't last another year. What's the point of doing anything? I think she'd be perfectly happy at her grandmother's cottage. She can reminisce about her childhood. Besides, there'll be a decent inheritance when she passes. It could really help us." David looked at his mother thoughtfully and sighed. The next day, all the bags and suitcases belonging to Hope, David's wife, were packed. His mother, Eleanor, had placed them in the hallway, a smirk on her face as she saw her bewildered daughter-in-law. Hope was a petite, sweet young woman with bright blonde hair, sitting in a wheelchair. At 27, a sudden stroke had left her an invalid, robbing her of both her mobility and her speech. She was almost always in her wheelchair, silent. Eleanor cared for her daughter-in-law while David was at work for an insurance firm. At times, Hope suspected her husband purposely stayed late to avoid coming home to a helpless wife who couldn't even use the toilet on her own. It's worth noting that Eleanor had never particularly liked Hope. She disliked her ambition and her desire to achieve more. Eleanor believed a woman should support her husband, not spend her days running around for her company. Hope was an assistant to the CEO of a large firm and had wanted to climb the corporate ladder, ideally to start her own business. However, she had neither the money nor the opportunity yet. The stroke had erased any sympathy Eleanor felt for her daughter-in-law. If before she merely pestered the girl with her nitpicking, now she constantly yelled at her, had no patience for Hope's silent pleas, and often forgot her medicine or meals. Only one thing made her happy. Hope couldn't speak, so she couldn't interrupt Eleanor as she reread the plays she had once performed in the West End. As David carried the heavy suitcases to the car, Hope sat opposite the front door, watching the scene with silent horror. Her eyes were red, and she was on the verge of tears. "Don't worry," Eleanor sneered. "Your doctor said you have a weak heart and won't last long. The country air might do you good. You might even make it a year. The cottage, didn't you always want to go back there?" 1,000 thoughts swirled in Hope's mind, but she couldn't voice a single one. Her hands lay limply in her lap. If she could, she would have gripped the fabric of her tracksuit bottoms fiercely, and then screamed at her mother-in-law, telling the old grey-haired hag exactly what she thought of her. "Darling David, what's taking you so long?" A breathless David ascended the stairs, breathing heavily. It was clear the journey was difficult. He looked at his mother, his hand outstretched. "The lift broke down. I had to carry everything from the 20th floor." Eleanor threw her hands up and shook her head, looking at Hope with reproach. "I told you we should hire a mover. Mum, you know we can't afford it. I used to play in theatres every night, selling out shows, and Michael would come to watch after his lectures," she said dreamily. "Could I have ever imagined I'd be changing nappies?" Eleanor looked at her daughter-in-law and fell silent. A neighbour, Vera, walked by on the landing. "Good day," she nodded. "Are you going somewhere?" Eleanor smiled broadly. "Vera, hello. Yes, we're taking our Hope to a rehabilitation centre for a while. The doctor said it should help." "That must be very expensive," Vera said, shaking her head. "Oh, it is. Very expensive. But we have to tighten our belts," Eleanor sighed. "We can't leave her without treatment. She's done so much for us." Vera said something else and went into her flat. The smile and pitiful expression vanished from Eleanor's face. She turned to her son and scowled. "Hurry up before the whole building finds out our plans. I told you we should have done this early in the morning." David picked up a suitcase and snorted. "Morning? It's freezing out there. It's autumn. Do you want me to get frostbite?" he asked. And without waiting for an answer, he left the flat, leaving his outraged mother behind. David was the only much-loved child. Eleanor and Michael had him late in life and doted on him. The law professor and the dramatic theatre star put their careers on hold to raise their son. The result of this overprotection was a timid David, who at nearly 40 still lived with his mother and worked a low-paying job where his boss tormented him and his colleagues disliked him. Almost 40 minutes later, David had finished moving everything and Hope herself. He put the girl in the back seat and folded up her wheelchair. Tears streamed down her face, and she breathed heavily. Her eyes, filled with confusion and a glimmer of hope, stared at her husband. "Hope, please calm down," he whispered softly, adjusting her seatbelt. "There's a neighbor who will look after you. We'll pay her from your money, of course," Eleanor interjected. David shrugged and nodded. "You see, we're not doing so well financially right now. So, yes, from your money, you'll be better off there." Hope stared at her husband without blinking, trying to find a trace of pity or reluctance on his pale face. But there was nothing, just his constant glances around, looking for anyone who might see a crying girl and the man carrying her to a car. The car pulled away from their home exactly at noon. Eleanor waved and went inside to reread her tattered play scripts, imagining herself on stage, greeted by the applause of adoring art lovers. David sighed, speeding up, trying not to look in the rearview mirror where he could see his wife's swollen eyes sitting rigidly in the back. "Hope, you understand, don't you? I have no other choice." He could have sworn the girl raised an eyebrow mockingly, but when he rubbed his eyes, he saw only his wife's impassive face. "My mom is trying to do what's best for us. She's right. I can't look after you all the time. I have work and she's not getting any younger. So you'll be better off there. You'll have your own carer. You're going back to your grandmother's cottage, which you always remembered so fondly." David fell silent again, turning away from his wife's gaze. Yet he felt it on his back, as if it was burning a hole through his thin jacket and searing his lungs, making him breathe faster. The journey to the village where Hope was to live was long. It was a secluded, almost abandoned village with a few streets, a single shop in the center, and an old medical center that had been closed for years. The dark blue car rumbled to a stop in front of a small cottage with an overgrown garden and a leaning fence. The cottage itself was in good shape, at least from the outside. The garden was full of old trees and thick grass that in some places was taller than the fence. An old bench stood in front of the window on two small stumps, with someone lying on it. As David pulled his wife out of the car and set up her wheelchair, Hope stared unblinking at the silhouette lying next to her long-dead grandmother's cottage. She squinted, but couldn't make out who it was. "Gail," David called out. A short woman with short hair stirred grumbling from the bench. She wobbled towards the gate. Her face was wrinkled and sagging, her hair tangled, a large cut on her lip, and an old bruise under her eye. Gail was dressed in completely mismatched clothes, a yellow t-shirt with some English words, green shorts that were entirely unsuitable for the weather, and worn-out pink trainers with rhinestones. "David Michael," the woman shrieked. "You're early," Gail stammered. David scowled and turned to his wife. "This is your carer, Hope. Meet Gail. She'll be looking after you now." In confirmation, Gail nodded and swayed. If Hope could have, she would have rolled her eyes. The situation seemed monstrously ridiculous and terrifying. David unloaded all the suitcases from the car and carried them into the house. He slipped a thin envelope into Gail's hand. It was clearly not much, but judging by her expression, it was enough for her. Then the man stopped in front of the wheelchair and sighed. "Well, aren't you happy? I'm sure you're smiling inside. It's your childhood home, after all." The man gestured to the overgrown yard, the gate that had fallen apart in his hands, and the fresh air. What more could you want for happiness? Hope wanted to list a million things that would make her happy, but as usual, she remained silent, glaring at her husband. Every look she gave carried more thought than anyone could express in words. David knew this, and a small worm of conscience wriggled in his soul. But then his mother's words and the figures on the card came to mind, and the worm fell silent, anticipating the taste of money. David got in the car and waved to his wife from the window. Gail approached her charge, waving at the man. "Don't you worry, David Michael. Everything will be fine." The man forced another smile, and the car pulled away from the ill-fated house, leaving Hope alone with an empty, overgrown house and a drunkard who reeked not only of alcohol, but of everything else in the village. A year later. "David, are you serious?" You haven't checked on your wife even once in a year? Eleanor looked at the calendar in horror. Are you a complete idiot, David? Who raised you? How do you know she isn't dead already? Or worse, that she's up and walking? David looked up from the TV and stared wearily at the match. He had just come home from work and had accidentally mentioned he hadn't visited his wife once. Eleanor was shocked and outraged. Gail calls me every week. Everything's fine there. I send her money every quarter. So, calm down. Eleanor scoffed, walked to the sofa where her son was lying, snatched the remote and turned off the cursed box. When I'm talking to you, you should only look at me, the woman said loudly and a little dramatically, shaking her head and her elaborate hairstyle. Gail, who is this? That drunkard you left to look after your wife? Are you sure she's looking after her and not drinking the money I give her? Maybe she hasn't been to see Hope in ages while you lie here watching TV. David rolled his eyes, staring blankly at the wall. Do you want me to go and see her tomorrow? Fine. I'll spend my only day off driving to a backwater village to see a half-dead wife. Yes, Mum, you care a lot about me. Snorting loudly, Eleanor threw the TV remote at her son and left the room, quietly muttering everything she thought about him. The next morning, David packed a few things, grabbed an envelope with money, and got in the car. He looked with longing at the clock, which showed only 8 a.m. The man could still be sleeping, but he had to drive to who knows where, and most importantly, for what reason. He thought his mother's fears were pointless, but since childhood, he was used to obeying her in everything. The journey was long. To make matters worse, the radio was broken. The silence of the car and the rare exclamations of impatient drivers made the morning even worse. Just as he was about to enter the village, a large black van came hurtling towards him. It was driving fast, clearly knowing the area. The driver looked a few years younger than David. He braked sharply at the sight of the slow-moving city car and apologized softly, saying he didn't mean to. David waved his hand wearily, not wanting to start an argument. He vaguely remembered the way to the cottage where Hope was living. He had given the money to Gail in the town center, where she came by bus, specifically for the envelope. David had only been to the village 3 times in total, once when he took his wife there, a second time when he looked for Gail, and a third time long ago, when he was still dating Hope and she showed him her childhood cottage, telling him her mother had lived there as a child and then she had. The dark blue car stopped next to a newly built fence. The grass in the garden had been cut but had already grown significantly, as if it had been done a long time ago. The whole area looked neglected, as if no one had been there for a long time. David frowned and got out of the car. He carefully opened the gate and called out for his wife, then for Gail. Silence. No one answered. The man tried to go inside the cottage, but there was a huge padlock on the door. David tugged on the door, but it wouldn't open. He pulled out his phone and started calling Gail, but she didn't answer. The man warily rubbed his forehead and looked around the area. Gail's cottage was supposed to be nearby. He had found her very close to Hope's cottage then, and it had seemed like a great stroke of luck. But now, his mother's suspicions didn't seem so foolish. Gail didn't inspire trust, but for some reason, David had still trusted her. Leaving the cottage grounds, the man walked down the street to find Gail's house. It looked even worse than Hope's. David went inside and held his nose. A nasty smell hit him. It was so strong that David only had the strength to quickly run through the house. Gail wasn't there, and he hurried out, breathing deeply. Catching his breath, he looked up and saw a plump woman walking by with 2 buckets. "Excuse me," David shouted and ran towards her. "Do you know where Hope is?" The woman frowned. "She lived in that house," David said, pointing. "And Gail, the alcoholic Gail?" David nodded affirmatively. "Well, then she's probably at Arthur's. He lives at the end of the village. She buys her booze from him. And who are you?" "It doesn't matter," David said, waving his hand. "Show me where Arthur's house is." "Why not?" The woman showed him the way to the local bootlegger's house. Gail was indeed inside. She was sitting at a huge round table, sipping a yellow drink that gave off a strong aroma. David grabbed Gail by the arms and led her outside. "Where's Hope, you drunken sot?" he asked. "She lives not far from here," Gail said with a grin, raising her uncooperative hand. "And what's in it for me?" David angrily took out his wallet and pulled out a few notes for Gail. She quickly counted the money and nodded happily. Then she escaped the man's firm grip and ran into Arthur's house. She came out without the money, but with a large bottle of a cloudy yellow liquid. "Let's go." The woman waved and waddled forward, trying not to fall. David followed her. The woman led him far out of the village. They walked for a long time down an empty road. The man thought Gail was trying to confuse him and was about to shout at her. But in the distance, the roof of an unknown house appeared. The closer David and Gail got to it, the more he was surprised by the size of the house compared to the other buildings in the village. It seemed simply enormous. 3 stories, a balcony, a huge garden in the backyard. Several cars and farm equipment were visible. Gail stopped near the iron gates of the house and pointed straight ahead. "There you go," she nodded, her head almost snapping off, and walked away without saying anything else. David was in shock from what he saw, so he didn't answer the woman. He pressed a small bell. A cheerful, happy voice rang out. "Arthur, why are you so early?" David was momentarily stunned. "Hope?" he asked softly. The voice on the other end fell silent and then sighed deeply. "David, come in." The gate swung open. David walked carefully along a stone path bordered by a huge number of flowers. On the steps of the house stood a short, petite woman with blonde hair. She was wearing a beige tracksuit and a shawl. She looked down at her husband, her face almost impassive, as if it were a mask. "I thought you wouldn't show up," she sneered. "But come in now that you're here." David was speechless. He simply walked slowly behind his wife, who was striding through the house. Inside, the house was simply but tastefully decorated. Pleasant colors, beautiful decorations and paintings, soft, clean carpets. One of the doors led to a small study with a computer and a desk covered in papers. "Oh, don't look over there. We have a complete mess with the paperwork lately. I need to sort it out better." David didn't understand anything but shifted his gaze to his wife, who looked even better than before her stroke. Her pale face was covered with a healthy blush. Her lips were a glossy red, and her eyes were lightly lined. There was nothing excessive, but it seemed David had never seen such beauty. Hope led the man to a large room with sofas and armchairs. "I'll make some tea, and we can talk." Hope went to the kitchen for tea, and David was left alone in the room. He sat down in an armchair, unable to take his eyes off the beauty of the room. The paintings, the sofas, the flowers, the carpets, it all seemed unreal. The man even pinched himself to prove that it was real. He couldn't believe he had expected to see a sick wife in a wheelchair, and instead, a beauty he had never seen in his life stood before him. Hope returned a couple of minutes later with a large tray holding several cups of tea. She handed one cup to her husband and took the other herself, sitting carefully opposite him. "You didn't expect this, did you?" she asked softly. The man shook his head. "I didn't either," she said. "That for money, my beloved husband would send me away to die. I thought—" "Keep your pointless excuses to yourself," Hope said. "I know everything about you, darling. You're terrible at hiding the truth. It's all about my inheritance. When I received the will from my grandmother in Germany, I was so happy imagining the life we would have. But then I saw something that made me change my mind." "What?" David stammered, holding the hot teacup as if he didn't feel the pain. He stared straight at his wife's face, hoping to see something there that would help him understand what was happening. "Remember my friend?" Hope asked. "Charlotte? We worked together at the firm." David nodded. "She's the one who advised me to change my life a year and a half ago." Tall, stately Charlotte was sitting in an armchair in a small restaurant where their boss had sent them for negotiations that were now over. "Dinner's on the company. Why not splurge?" Hope said, settling in opposite Charlotte. Charlotte was Hope's colleague. She worked at the firm with Hope, was a few years older than her, and held the position of department head. She always wore strict suits and had a very definite opinion on many things, especially finances. Hope opened a small handbag, took out an envelope, and handed it to her friend. "What do you think? Is it real?" Charlotte opened the envelope with interest and read the letter. It was a letter from Germany. "Who is Anna Reuter?" "My grandmother," Hope replied. "On my father's side. She married a German man when Dad was about 6 or 7, and they moved there. Then Dad returned to England and met Mum. The last time I saw my grandmother was at my father's funeral. She offered to take me with her." "And why didn't you agree?" Hope asked, surprised. I would have had to leave David. He had his mum here and his job, and I never dreamed of living abroad. Charlotte looked at her colleague with a look of incomprehension. You're incorrigible, Hope. Trading a good life in Germany for a man? Hope rolled her eyes. She knew her friend's opinion of her husband and preferred not to listen. Charlotte was always very blunt, which had helped her career but meant she had few friends. They all ran away from her frankness. Your David would be ready to sell his own mother for money. Do you even know how much your grandmother left you? There was a letter attached, Hope said. She wrote that I was her last living relative and that she was leaving part of the inheritance to her husband's children and part to me. Judging by the letter, it's a very decent amount, as well as a small share in an estate in Germany. You have to go there to get it? Charlotte asked. There are instructions. You can accept the inheritance in England. A solicitor will come here himself. A waiter came and brought the food. The girls had ordered a salad and a glass of wine each. I can just imagine how happy David will be. He always dreamed of money, of his own business. You dreamed of it too, Charlotte pointed out, waving her fork. And unlike him, you have the chance to run it. Don't say that about David. He's a good person. He's just unlucky. Charlotte laughed loudly. Yes, and he's most unlucky with his mother. I still don't understand why you live with her when you could move out. Hope shrugged. Eleanor can't live alone. She's not used to it. And it's not that hard for me to put up with her. Charlotte grumbled unhappily and sipped her wine. I wouldn't advise you to tell them about the inheritance. They'll either send you to your grave for the money or they'll start buttering you up and take every last penny. Hope hit the table with her palm and looked at her friend with a threatening expression. David and I love each other. Nothing like that will happen. Don't be so negative. You have a terrible opinion of my family. The conversation ended there. That same evening, Hope went home and told her family about the inheritance, showing them the envelope. The girl had never seen them so happy. That night, Eleanor opened a bottle of expensive champagne and David, despite their constant penny pinching, ordered a takeaway to celebrate. Hope felt like her life was finally getting better. A few weeks later, Hope walked down the street, smiling at everything around her. Life at home was better. Eleanor had stopped picking on her. David was coming home from work earlier and spending more time with his wife. Hope was sure her life had improved and would stay that way forever. The girl decided to stop by a men's clothing shop. She wanted to buy her husband a new tie, as he was tired of all his old ones. Hope was captivated by the window display and noticed nothing around her. Then she turned her head and saw David. She wanted to call out to him, but then she saw a girl walking towards him. The man hugged her and kissed her. Struck unexpectedly, Hope stumbled and leaned against the shop window to keep her balance. She couldn't believe what she saw. Hope didn't cause a scene. She simply returned home and went to bed early, thinking about what had happened. The next morning, the girl took the day off work and went to a local detective agency. A short, thin man with glasses sat at a small desk, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. Hope sat opposite him and explained the situation. What exactly do you need? Everything, Hope said. How they met, how long they've been seeing each other, their words, their actions, their meeting places. I want to know everything. The man whistled but said nothing. He seemed surprised by the girl's zeal but chose to stay silent so as not to lose a client. For a whole week, Hope was in limbo. She didn't dare tell Charlotte the truth, not wanting to hear her say, "I told you so." But she had to admit Charlotte had been right. It was as if she could always see right through David. Not wanting them to be together, she had refused to be a witness at their wedding, which had hurt Hope deeply. They had soon made up, but the lingering bitterness in the girl's heart remained. Only now was she beginning to understand her friend, who had only wanted to get through to her. A week later, Hope sat alone in a small coffee shop, sipping her now cold coffee. She was thinking about what was happening. Everything just wouldn't fall into place in her mind. The girl had always tried for her husband, doing everything he or his mother asked. She had even swallowed her pride, lowering her ambitions. The man's call to the detective agency broke her thoughts. Hope threw a note on the table, grabbed her bag, and rushed to the agency, as it was conveniently close. She flew inside and sat down opposite the man who, as before, was reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. He looked up at his client and adjusted his glasses. "You're lucky, you know. Your husband's mistress turned out to be quite talkative." "Really?" Hope asked, not wanting to hear the answer. But the man nodded anyway. I had to follow her for almost a week and question her friends. But I found out everything. Her name is Lily Sanders. She's 22, a graduate of a teaching college. They met a few months ago on the street, I think. Thanks for the information. What about some facts, like a video or... The detective smiled broadly, reached into a desk drawer, and took out a huge old-fashioned dictaphone. Hope was truly surprised. She hadn't seen a device like that since she was a child. It seemed they didn't make them anymore. Twiddling with it, the man turned on a loud, sometimes crackling recording. "Oh, David!" a cheerful woman's voice shrieked. "Is this for me? Oh my God, it's beautiful. It must have been expensive." "No amount of money is too much for you," David said in a pleased voice. "When I open my own business, I'll be able to buy you trinkets every day." "When, David?" the girl asked again. "You said you didn't have the money for a business yet." There were no sounds, but Hope was ready to swear. David smiled broadly. "My wife has it. She just got an inheritance from her old grandmother. We'll open the business with her money and live well." "Will you leave her?" the girl said, as if through pouting lips. "As soon as she's no longer useful to me, yes," David said loudly. The recording continued, and the man and the girl talked about something else, but Hope was no longer listening. She was lost in her own thoughts, sitting perfectly straight, staring straight ahead. She remembered meeting her husband, and how happy she was when he proposed. Hope was 11 years younger than David. They met when she was finishing her business degree. He would invite her to cozy cafes, walk with her in the park under the stars, buy tickets to the theater and concerts. Eleanor had seemed so sweet and kind then. Hope, who had recently lost her mother, fell in love with the cultured family and was ready to marry the not-so-wealthy and shy David. Charlotte was against it, but Hope didn't listen. She was consumed by new feelings. The girl's mind drifted back to the memory of her and David picking out his wedding suit and how, after the ceremony, they had sorted through the gifts, counting which relative had given the most. The girl was incredibly happy then. She was sure she would always be so happy, despite David not being particularly thrilled about her dreams of a business and a career. He, and even more so his mother, wanted a family and children. The girl wasn't ready for that. She wanted more. Now, all her dreams and hopes for a life together had shattered in an instant. David, the very same David, who had never raised his voice at his wife, was talking about using Hope's money to open a business and then leaving her. It seemed so wild that the girl just sat there, staring at the wall for several minutes. The detective didn't interrupt. He had seen worse reactions. This was the most normal one. Once, one crazy wife had simply smashed his window in a fit of rage at her husband. That had seemed like a wild, extreme measure of disappointment and anger. But now, he looked into the girl's eyes and saw all-consuming hatred and pain that even affected him. The man got up and went to get a glass of water for his client. Hope drank the water in one gulp and then remembered Charlotte's words about David being ready to sell his own mother for money. At the time, the girl hadn't believed Charlotte. But now it seemed true. A plan began to form in the girl's clever mind. A wicked grin appeared on her face, and the detective recoiled. He had never seen such an expression. A few months later, David's dark blue car pulled away from the leaning fence behind which Hope remained. Gail was holding her wheelchair, though she was more holding on to the wheelchair than holding it. As soon as the car was out of sight, Hope stood up. Gail's eyes widened as she watched her charge, who had just stood up from a wheelchair after a stroke. "Gail, let's make a deal. I'll pay you the same amount my husband does, but you won't tell him what you've seen." Gail nodded, stunned, unable to ask questions. She was still clinging to the wheelchair. "Perfect. We'll get along just fine. Here's your first payment." Hope handed her a few notes. "You'll come by every month, and I'll give you money. In return, you have to tell my husband that my condition hasn't changed and that he doesn't need to visit. Understood?" The woman nodded, snatched the notes, and walked away without saying goodbye. Hope went inside to change. Inside the old cottage, everything was dusty. The furniture was covered with sheets. There was rubbish everywhere. One window was completely broken. Kids must have been trying to get in. Hope walked over to an old red sofa, pulled off the sheet, and sat down wearily. A cloud of dust rose around her. The girl took out a phone from her pocket that Eleanor had miraculously not found and dialed the only number she could trust. "Come over?" Everything happened just as you said. Yes, the cottage in the village. I'm waiting." Hope tossed the phone aside and lay down. A flood of thoughts swirled in her head. She was thinking about everything and nothing all at once. An hour and a half later, after Hope had cleaned the cottage, changed, and made some food, the door opened and a tall girl in a strict blue suit walked in. She had a small bag with her, containing wine and some takeaway food. "Scrambled eggs don't tempt me," Charlotte sneered, nodding towards an old, dirty frying pan that was covered in such a thick layer of grease it was probably impossible to clean. "Good thing you brought wine. Without it, I definitely wouldn't have survived this day." Charlotte looked around the cottage and nodded to herself. Then her eyes fell on a packet of incontinence pads, and she shook her head. "You were living in this hell for 3 weeks. It's horribly disgusting." "I can't disagree, but you know what bothered me more?" Hope asked, taking dishes out of the cupboards. "Eleanor only changed my pad once a day. It was as if she didn't even notice I had to go to the toilet. She was so engrossed in her novels she didn't hear me get up and walk around the house." Charlotte laughed. "If you had left the house for a few days, she definitely wouldn't have noticed. The main thing is to leave an album with her old pictures nearby." "That's for sure," Hope sighed, sitting down at the table. "I still can't believe they left me here to die. And they believed the quick diagnosis. They heard I wouldn't last long, and they were happy about it. Where would they have found the time to question Dr. Peterson's diagnosis?" Charlotte and Hope began to eat, thinking about what to do next. "I'll live here for a month or two until I figure out what to do with my life. I have no prospects for the future. For the first time in my life, I have no plans." "What are you going to do here?" Charlotte asked. "An old abandoned cottage, an overgrown garden, a remote village? You and a place like this don't mix. If I jump in headfirst right now, I'll definitely lose everything. I'm not in the right state of mind," Hope explained. "You know, I gave up on my dream of a business a long time ago. All my plans and ideas are gathering dust somewhere in the back of a cupboard, and I don't think they're relevant anymore. I'll live here, relax, and maybe I'll come up with something." "I haven't had a holiday in a long time," Charlotte shrugged. She didn't know what to say to her friend for the first time. She didn't like David, without even knowing why. She had been stupid to refuse to be a witness, but she hadn't thought he was capable of this. She had joked that he would sell his own mother, but she had always thought he was a spineless man, incapable of anything more than selling insurance. But he had been able to abandon a person to die, and not just any person, but his wife. It seemed like madness. Charlotte spent the first night with her friend in the cottage and went home the next morning. Hope had quit her job, but Charlotte hadn't, and she didn't have a huge inheritance from her grandmother. Hope started the new day with a cold shower. Luckily, her grandmother's cottage had running water and even gas. Her parents had installed all the amenities for her grandmother, but she had died soon after, unable to fully enjoy them. The cold shower was able to refresh Hope's cluttered mind a little, and she took a deep breath, feeling the icy drops of water hitting her back. The 3 weeks of living in hell were behind her. She had tested her husband, hoping to see at least a drop of care or love from him. But in the end, she had only found hatred and the anticipation of her quick death. This was the most terrible part, so Hope couldn't quickly return to her former rhythm. Her normal life was over. She had to cheer herself up. She took the money she had hidden from her suitcase and went to the shop. She vaguely remembered its location and decided to ask the villagers for help. Luckily, it was early morning, and everyone was either going to work or to their gardens. It was cool outside in autumn, especially in the morning, and Hope wrapped herself more tightly in an old coat she had found in the cupboard. She managed to find the shop without the help of passers-by. It was exactly the same as it had been 20 years ago. The girl smiled at the sight of the familiar colorful sign and the hazy window through which she could see the counters and a plump shopkeeper in a blue apron. Hope went inside and breathed in the familiar smell of fresh bread and the lemonade the shopkeeper loved. Her name was Victoria. When Hope was a child, she had just started working there. Now she was probably in charge of the shop. "Auntie Vicky, hello, do you recognize me?" Hope asked. The woman thought for a moment. "Something's familiar." "I can't quite remember. I'm Margaret Burla's granddaughter. I used to come here as a child." "Oh, Hope, how could I not recognize you?" the woman said, coming from behind the counter. She hugged Hope and kissed her on the cheek. "You haven't been here in so long, and nothing's changed with us." "I noticed. Will you sell me some groceries?" Hope asked, looking at the counters. They were filled with food, even though the shop seemed very small. The girl checked the prices and realized they were even higher than in the city. "Prices are huge, aren't they, Victoria?" she said, throwing her hands up. "Give me a loaf of brown bread and a loaf of white, a bottle of milk, butter and vegetable oil, a kilogram each of pasta, buckwheat, rice and peas, cheese, sugar, salt and—" "Oh, Hope, you should go to Penelope for dairy. She lives right next door to you. This milk," the woman said, nodding at the counter, "even a cat would be ashamed to give. It has a shelf life of 6 months. Where have you ever seen milk that lasts that long? And for vegetables, potatoes, onions, beetroot, carrots, you should go to Mr. Davies. Everyone here buys from the local farmer, but this has been here for a while. Almost everyone in the village has their own gardens, but Mr. Davies always sells his stuff cheap. Ask for directions. He's not far from the shop." Victoria's words were interrupted by a bell and a man who burst into the shop. He was dressed in dirty clothes. His face was very serious. He pushed Hope away from the counter and said loudly, "Victoria, give me 2 bottles of mineral water. And you should have a delivery here for me, a box of medicine and pesticide. I'll need it soon for planting before winter." "Nicholas, don't you see there's a customer here?" Victoria asked sternly. Nicholas glanced at the girl and waved her off. "She's a city girl. If she needs it so badly, let her buy it in her city. I'm in a hurry." "Nicholas," Victoria said sternly. Hope raised her hand in a conciliatory gesture. "Let him go, Auntie Vicky. I think he needs it more." Victoria looked at him disapprovingly and went to get the box. "Couldn't it have waited just a few minutes?" The man was tall and dark-haired. His hands were calloused, and his gaze was stern. Hope hadn't seen people like that since she was a child. Despite his rough, slightly disheveled appearance, Nicholas was a handsome and young man. He was clearly over 30, but definitely not over 40. He looked at the girl, squinting. "Does it matter to you?" the man asked rudely. "I'm not in a hurry, of course. But even in the city, people wait in line. And believe me, they're in a much bigger hurry than you are." Hope smiled and turned away, feeling the man's piercing brown eyes on her. Victoria came out with a heavy box and handed it to the customer. "Go on." "The mineral water is over there." She nodded towards a far corner where plastic bottles of mineral water were indeed standing. "You can pay me later?" Nicholas nodded, grabbed the 2 bottles of mineral water, and left the shop without saying goodbye. "Who was that?" Hope asked Victoria. The woman waved her hand and went to the shelf with cereals. "A local farmer. He inherited a small house and some livestock from his father about 8 years ago. He decided to start a farm. He built everything himself, hired workers. He's trying his best. He wants to plant fields, but for now, he's only planting large gardens and selling the products to our shop and the neighboring villages. He's not a bad bloke, but a bit rude. No one knows why." Hope gathered several bags of groceries and took them home. They were heavy, and she barely made it, but the small fridge in the cottage no longer looked so empty. Then the girl went for vegetables and dairy products from the people Victoria had recommended. Although the girl was used to buying everything at the supermarket in the city, in the village it was cheaper and better to buy from local people. Mr. Davies lived not far from the shop. He had a large plot of land and 2 goats that bleated loudly at the sight of Hope. As a child, the girl was afraid of animals, so now she walked around them. In the cottage, Hope found an old man who was making a chair. The girl explained the situation and introduced herself. "Oh, Hope, I'm so happy to meet you." The old man smiled through his thick grey beard. "We haven't had young people in the village for a long time. You're the first in years, and you're Rita Burla's granddaughter." "Yes, that's my mum," the girl nodded. "So, will you sell me some vegetables?" "I can give you some apples as a bonus." Mr. Davies smiled. "They're good and ripe. They'll be great for winter and for making compotes and jam." Hope smiled happily. However, her smile vanished when she left the old man's house with 3 huge bags that weighed twice as much as her previous shopping bags. Mr. Davies had decided to sell her enough food for a month and a half. Apparently, he thought the girl would only eat potatoes and beetroot. Hope didn't want to be rude, so she sacrificed her back, which definitely couldn't handle the weight. After only a few steps, Hope stopped, putting the heavy bags on the ground. A black van with a large boot stopped not far from her. "Need some help?" Hope looked up, hearing the familiar voice, and saw Nicholas looking at her bags. Remembering what the man had said at the shop, the girl started to think. She didn't want to ride with a person who didn't know how to be polite, but she also didn't want to drag the huge bags, so she had to swallow her pride again. That wouldn't be a bad idea. Nicholas got out of the car and picked up the bags. "You really stocked up, didn't you? Are you planning on staying here for the winter?" "No, I'm making compote and frying potatoes." The girl smiled and picked up a smaller bag, helping him load the van. Nicholas turned and took the bag from the girl's hands. Hope felt his warm touch and froze for a second. Then she let go of the rough fabric and took a few steps back. Nicholas put the bag down and closed the van's boot. "Show me the way." "Of course," Hope said, getting into the passenger seat. "So, you're a city girl?" Nicholas asked when he started the car. "Yeah," Hope said thoughtfully. "And what brought you here?" "I grew up here," Hope shrugged. "And then I had some problems back home and needed to get away on my own for a while. I remembered this cottage. I've always loved this village. It's quiet and peaceful. Nothing gets in the way of thinking." "That's true," Nicholas said. He drove fast, either because he was in a hurry or because it was his style of driving. He didn't seem to slow down in the shop or on the street either, so Hope decided it was just his character. The bags were unloaded and even carried into the cottage. Nicholas walked through the grass, which reached his waist. It had already started to dry, so it rustled loudly under his feet. "There's really no one to cut it. My grandmother did it herself, almost until she died. She knew how to do everything, from sewing to butchering and fixing the roof. But I'm a helpless city girl. Almost no women in the village know how to use a lawnmower, not even an electric one. Equality hasn't reached this far yet," she smiled. "You're from the city, right?" Nicholas asked, looking at his watch. "I have to go now." "What's your name?" Hope introduced herself. "That's a beautiful name. It was nice to meet you, Hope." "You too, Nicholas," the girl smiled. Nicholas drove away, leaving the girl alone. Hope watched the car leave for a long time, trying to figure out where her new acquaintance would lead. The next morning began with a loud rumble and a strange rustling sound. Hope woke up restlessly from her creaky bed and went to the window. Outside, in the middle of the overgrown grass, stood Nicholas with an old scythe. The grass was falling in neat rows with Nicholas's movements. It was clear he was sweating despite the cool morning weather. Hope opened the window and called out to the man. Nicholas looked up and stopped mowing. He was breathing deeply, looking at the open window and the girl staring at him. Hope was only wearing a long linen dress she had found in the cupboard and decided to use as a nightgown. After cleaning the house and cooking, the girl was quite exhausted and had no time to sort out her things, so she wore what she found in her grandmother's cupboard. "What are you doing?" Nicholas raised an eyebrow, silently expressing his opinion of her stupid question. "I know you're mowing, but why are you doing it at my place?" "Do you want me to stop?" Nicholas asked, looking at the girl with a little malice. Hope shook her head and closed the window, not wanting to continue the conversation. She had also noticed the man's gaze. He was clearly looking her up and down. To avoid such situations from happening again, the girl changed and went to the small kitchen. Hope decided to make pancakes. Of course, she had never woken up this early and didn't want to cook anything. Besides, the fast-paced city life had accustomed her to skipping breakfast. But she had to feed the unexpected helper, who had decided to come to her house early in the morning to work. By the time Nicholas had finished, and she knew because the sound of the scythe had stopped, the pancakes were ready. Hope had just finished frying the last one. The girl went out onto the porch and called out to her helper, "Come inside for breakfast." The man shrugged, put down the scythe, and went inside. He was all sweaty and tired. "You can use the shower," Hope said, nodding towards the bathroom and going back to the kitchen. Nicholas didn't take up the hostess's offer and just washed his face. He came to the kitchen and sat down at the table. A plate of pancakes and sour cream was in front of him. Hope stood next to the table with her arms crossed. "How much do I owe you?" Nicholas raised an eyebrow questioningly. "It can't be for free." "For the food," the man smiled and took a bite of a pancake. Leaning back in his chair, he stared straight into the girl's eyes as if he wanted to read something in them. "Well, if you don't want to get paid, I won't insist." Hope shrugged. "I'm used to any work being paid for." "And you haven't heard of help in the city?" Hope snorted and laughed. You said yourself that you're from the city. Auntie Vicky told me you've lived here for 8 years, so you can't blame me. I'm not blaming you. It's just that city people are always surprised when they get help for free. I used to be like that too. By the way, why aren't you eating? Nicholas asked. I don't eat breakfast, the girl said, waving her hand. I always had to go to work early. I'm not used to it. I usually had a snack at work. And what was your job? Nicholas asked, tilting his head. He was looking at the girl with interest. Assistant to the CEO of a firm? Nicholas whistled and smiled. It's surprising that after a job like that you ended up here, he said, gesturing to the small cottage with its worn wallpaper. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't raking in cash. Just a few pounds, if that. But I liked it. I was learning about running a business and I had a dream. And then I had a stroke, the girl grumbled. But I'll tell you that story some other time. I still have to clean the house and the attic today. Plus, a friend promised to come over this evening. A busy life, you know. Nicholas smiled in response to her words. I should go too, actually. Nicholas finished his breakfast and left Hope's cottage. She watched him leave for a long time, trying to understand his motives. That evening, Charlotte arrived. She brought some things Hope had asked for. Charlotte whistled when she saw the mowed and tidy yard. She put down her bags and called out to her friend, who was wiping the cloudy windows at the moment. I need to replace a window pane. Do you know where to find someone to do it? She asked without saying hello. Charlotte smiled. Ask the man who mowed your whole yard. That was Nicholas, the local farmer. He gave me a lift yesterday. I don't think he has time for a window pane, Hope said, waving her off. Well, he found time for the grass, Charlotte shrugged. What's his deal? Hope stopped wiping the window. She invited her friend inside. If you don't mind, can you peel the potatoes? They're under the sink. I can't do anything else. I'm exhausted. Hope landed on a chair and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. Charlotte took off her jacket and picked up a knife. So, what's the deal with the farmer? I didn't know him before. He came here 8 years ago. My grandmother had just passed away then. He has a farm with different animals and gardens. What else can I say about him? Is he rich? Oh, please, Hope snapped. What? Charlotte replied, outraged. It's important these days. Oh well, what do you think of him as a man? Hope thought for a moment. I don't know. He's ambiguous. First, he was rude to me in the shop. Then he decided it was a good idea to give me a lift. And then he came and mowed my lawn early in the morning even though I didn't ask him to. And then he refused to take money. Maybe he likes you. Don't be silly, Hope said, waving her hand. He thinks I'm a city fool as far as I can tell. Keep an eye on him. Maybe for once in your life you'll have a normal man who knows what a man is. Hope rolled her eyes but said nothing. How's work? Oh, don't ask. It's worse without you. Our boss has completely lost it. He's already gone through 3 assistants. It turns out you did more than we all thought. Hope had been living in the village for a month. She had gotten used to the small cottage and the quiet life, and she had also gotten used to resting, which was incredibly frustrating for her. All her life, the girl had worked. She had grown up in a family that wasn't very well off and had started working right after school. She never took days off without a good reason and always came to work on time. And now she had been doing almost nothing for a month. The first week, Hope had spent on the cottage, trying to make it livable, cleaning everything. But then came the silence and peace. The girl woke up late, read books Charlotte had brought, visited the old women, and listened to their stories from their youth. Hope also couldn't shake the feeling that she was constantly running into Nicholas. On the day Charlotte visited, he had heard the conversation about the window pane and came to replace it the next morning. Hope fed him pancakes. Then he fixed the gate, and the girl made him breakfast again. It became a routine. Hope was no longer surprised by the early morning rumble outside and the sight of a man by her window, and Nicholas, as usual, would come inside and sit at the table. They rarely had long, meaningful conversations. He didn't give her flowers or pay her compliments. He was just there. It seemed very strange. Hope desperately wanted to understand his motives. Confess, Nicholas, you just come here to eat, don't you? I wouldn't say that, the man smiled, taking his hand from the running tap. Most of their conversations were like this, short, not very meaningful, and usually humorous. Rumors were spreading in the village, and a girl from the farm even came to Hope's place and threatened her. Nicholas is mine, you understand? A menacing, curvaceous brunette said. "You think you can come here from the city and steal our men, but no way." The stranger angrily tore a leaf from a tree and threw it at the startled Hope, who was standing on the porch. When Nicholas came next, she told him about her admirer. "Are you scared?" The man smiled, but his words seemed to hold a note of seriousness. "I wasn't afraid of a village woman. I've been threatened by big grown-up men when I worked at a big firm. Once, I had to turn down a contract for my boss, and 5 grown men in suits almost beat me up right there. I was alone. Now that was scary, not a leaf thrown by some crazy admirer of a man who, for some unknown reason, fixes everything that breaks in my house." Nicholas smiled and fell silent. "You're not a man of many words, are you?" The man nodded. "Maybe we should start using first names. We don't seem to be that far apart in age." Nicholas agreed to the girl's suggestion and went back to his soup. Hope smiled. It was the first time she had seen a man who didn't want to talk. One day, Hope was walking through the village. Nicholas hadn't come to see her in a long time, and she assumed he had gotten bored. She went for a walk to clear her head. Deep down, she was also hoping to run into Nicholas. For some reason, she really wanted to see him again. She had become so used to his strange silence that she almost missed it. The only thing the girl saw in the village were men running back and forth, muttering to each other. Hope approached Victoria, who had come out of the shop and was looking into the distance with concern. "Auntie Vicky, what's wrong?" The woman put her hand to her face. "Nicholas's farm is falling apart. Something's wrong there. Some problems. Our men and women are so upset. They could be out of work, and where else can you find a job in our village? Oh, it's a disaster. Nicholas has always just barely managed, making ends meet, and now something has gone really wrong." Hope frowned and looked into the distance. "Can you tell me the way to Nicholas's farm?" Victoria explained how to get to Nicholas's place of work. His farm was at the very end of the village. It was a large, long building from which the mooing of cows could be heard. Some women in aprons were walking around, carrying buckets. In the backyard, there were men, and behind the farm there were large, empty gardens. It was the middle of autumn, so they were empty. Hope asked a passing woman where Nicholas's office was and went there. The man's office was small, even tiny. A desk and a chair were in the middle, and a cupboard and a small window were in the corner, through which a sliver of light entered. Nicholas himself was standing in the middle of the office, hunched over papers. He was silently mouthing words, counting on a calculator, and making corrections to documents. Hope came closer. "Nicholas, hello." The man turned abruptly and sighed. "Something else broke?" he asked. "Sorry, this isn't a good time." "No," Hope replied. "I heard you're having problems. I came to help. Is it with the paperwork?" "Everything's fine. I can handle it myself," the man said a little rudely. Hope came closer and almost pushed Nicholas away, taking the papers. The man sighed loudly. "Go away, or I'll have to take you out of here by force." Hope raised her hand and looked at the papers. She had only glanced at them but could already see huge sums and exorbitant expenses that were simply unnecessary for a small place like this, compared to the city. "Do you even have an accountant or a financial specialist?" "I can handle everything myself," Nicholas repeated. "I can see how well you're handling it. Outrageous expenses going nowhere. You desperately need a specialist." "And where am I supposed to find one?" Nicholas asked gloomily. Hope smiled broadly and pointed to herself. "I'm an economist by education. Besides, I worked for a firm for several years where the expenses and revenues were clearly much larger than yours." Nicholas waved his hand and sat down wearily in his chair, leaving Hope with the papers. Late in the evening, after it had gotten dark, Nicholas and Hope left his office. The farm was empty. The workers had all cleaned up and left. "Are you sure that if you cut these expenses, nothing will change? Why do you need both cold storage and milk delivery 3 times a day? One is enough. It will be taken away, and it will be stored in the fridge for the rest of the time. It makes no sense to drive the vans and spend a huge amount of money on that. And it's the same with many other expenses. The estimates are very poorly done." Nicholas scratched his head in confusion. "I used to be in the military. I'm not good with estimates and accounting. My father always dreamed of having his own big farm and fields, so I decided to make his dream come true, even though it's late." Is he dead? Hope asked. Thank God, no. He got seriously ill. I had to put him in a care home. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to handle him. So I had to raise the farm from its knees. Hope looked at Nicholas with sympathy as they walked down the narrow path. It was cool outside and the wind was blowing, but at the same time it felt like it couldn't be better. So calm and quiet. So, what's the story with the stroke? Nicholas asked unexpectedly. Hope flinched. At first, she wanted to make a joke, but then she remembered she had promised to tell him. Taking a loud breath, she began her story. That's when I came up with the plan. Hope remembered her conversation with the detective. Charlotte helped me carry it out. She found a doctor who, for a small fee, agreed to say I had a stroke and was going to die soon. They believed it quickly, as if they had been expecting it. It was terrible. The 3 weeks I spent living with my husband and mother-in-law completely took away any pity or sympathy I had for him. I became forgotten and useless. And when he brought me here, I realized that was the end. Nicholas took the girl's hand and squeezed it tightly. Hope looked at her hand, which the man was holding, and nodded in gratitude for his support. Why don't you go back to the city? At first, I just wanted to calm down and wait a little, but then I realized I don't want to go back. It's such a fast pace there, always rushing around. Besides, it's just another reminder of David and his mother. Nicholas let go of the girl's hand and sped up. Come on, I'll show you something. They walked for a long time. Hope had no idea where they were going, but when they arrived, she gasped in surprise. The man had brought her to a huge, luxurious house with a high fence. This is a friend of mine's house. We served together. He recently died of cancer. Now the house is for sale. And I want to buy it, but I don't have the money. You know that yourself. They're going to buy it to demolish it and build something like a sawmill or I don't even know what. You understand, don't you? If you buy this house, there's no going back. I don't want to go back to the city. I'm too fast and impatient for the country, and too slow for the city. It's a paradox. Here, I can achieve something, but not there. Hope looked at the man's stern face, at his eyes that were looking at the house with hope, at his tightly pressed lips, and at the wrinkles on his forehead that appeared when Nicholas was thinking about something serious. A look of determination lit up in Hope's eyes. She squeezed Nicholas's hand, just as he had a few minutes ago, and smiled. You'll definitely succeed. I'll help. We'll raise the farm, and you'll be the person your father dreamed of. I promise. Nicholas didn't say anything again, but the hope that glowed in his eyes made her happy. He believed in a better future. Nicholas and Hope began to work together. She helped him raise the farm and create new working conditions. They bought new livestock and equipment. The profits started to appear not only on paper. The man was very happy about this. He gave the girl flowers several times as a token of gratitude, and the tradition of fixing Hope's cottage returned. He came almost every morning. She made him breakfast. It was their ritual. A few weeks later, after a walk, Charlotte came to visit the girl and brought her some documents. Are you sure? She asked her friend. More than sure, Hope replied and took the folder. There's no going back, Charlotte repeated Hope's own words. I know, and I'm ready to take the risk. Charlotte said nothing, not wanting to argue with her friend. After what had happened, she tried to support her in all her endeavors. Hope hugged the documents to her chest and headed towards the farm. New equipment was supposed to be delivered today, so the girl was in as much of a hurry as she could be. Besides, she had some happy news for Nicholas. The girl found Nicholas in his office as usual. He was sitting at his desk writing something. He smiled and brightened up at the sight of her. You're early, he said, pulling out a chair for Hope. The girl sat down at the table and put the papers on it. Read. Nicholas took the folder and began to slowly flip through the papers. With each page, his eyes grew wider and wider. The girl watched his reaction with a hidden fear and anticipation. Closing the folder, Nicholas put it on the table and looked down at the girl. What have you done? He asked hoarsely. Did you buy the house? Hope nodded and got up from the chair wearily. She was standing right in front of the man, tilting her head back and looking him straight in the eyes. You didn't want it to be demolished. It was your friend's house, and I promised you that you would succeed. That's a lot of money, Nicholas said. It's my money. I can do whatever I want with it. Besides, I like the village and Hope's train of thought was interrupted by a kiss. Is this how you decided to get the house? Hope smiled when Nicholas pulled away. Is that what you think of me? He asked hoarsely. No, the girl said. I bought this house for us. If you want us to be... I think I've fallen in love. The man kissed the girl again. Me too, he said, gently hugging Hope. The present. David sat opposite his wife and couldn't believe her story. His hands lay limply in his lap and his eyes stared straight ahead. He wasn't trying to see anything. He just couldn't turn his head in surprise. Are you saying you came up with all of this to test me? Hope looked at him sadly and sipped her tea. There was a knock on the door. Charlotte came in wearing a form-fitting blue dress. She looked straight at David and smiled. So, did you tell him everything? It's a shame I missed his face. I'm a little late. So you knew everything? David roared. Charlotte smiled. It was my doctor I paid for the diagnosis. Did you really think Hope would have pulled this off all on her own? She loved you too much to do that, but you broke her heart. You decided you could treat her like rubbish. David pursed his lips. You don't know anything, Hope. I love you. Hope raised her eyebrows and smiled. And what about Lily? Doesn't she suit you anymore? Or couldn't she wait for you to open your business and shower her with gifts? David opened his mouth to object, but fell silent at the last minute, realizing his excuses were pointless. But how could you play such a trick on me and Mum? David asked. She was so upset when she heard you were sick. Charlotte and Hope exchanged glances and laughed. Eleanor was the first to run around, screaming with joy that her daughter-in-law was sick and would soon die. She was waiting for my inheritance more than you were. David looked at the house and then smiled broadly. You bought and earned all of this while we were married. Charlotte frowned, understanding what her friend's husband was getting at. She wanted to object, but he spoke again. And since you acquired this while we were married, half of the property is mine, right? Charlotte was a solicitor. She knew the law perfectly and how these situations ended. Hope got up from the armchair and looked at her husband with anger, about to tell him exactly what she thought of him. But at that moment, the door opened and the man from the van that had almost hit David came in. Hey, Nicholas. Charlotte nodded and whispered something in the man's ear. Nicholas turned to David with a very serious and enraged face. It seemed almost impossible to stop him. He advanced on the man. David swallowed in fear and began to back away, squeaking. Listen, if you're an idiot and decide to threaten Hope, I'll make your life a living hell, Nicholas said roughly, grabbing David by the collar and throwing him out of the room. Charlotte, Hope, and Nicholas heard the front door slam. David was walking away from the house quickly. Why did you let him in? Nicholas asked Hope, coming closer and hugging her from behind. In front of her husband, she had kept herself composed, not wanting to show any weakness. But everyone in the room knew how hard she was taking her husband's betrayal. The girl stood with her head bowed low, holding back her tears. I had to tell him everything, the girl said. I needed to see his face when he realized my inheritance wasn't his. Do you feel better now? Charlotte asked. Hope nodded and snuggled closer into Nicholas's strong, reliable arms. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. Despite Nicholas's threats, David decided to sue for divorce with the division of property. From a legal point of view, everything was correct. If he had tried to claim the inheritance, he would have been in the wrong, but the girl had bought the house and rented the fields, the income from which was considered community property. The notification from the court came in the post. Nicholas brought it with the other documents and handed it to the girl grimly. When Hope opened the envelope and read the summons, she turned pale and sat down on the sofa wearily. She was all dirty and dusty, having just returned from the fields, but she didn't care. She hadn't thought David would actually sue for the division of property. Then again, she hadn't thought he would leave her to die either. He had turned out to be a very unpredictable person. We need a good solicitor, Nicholas said, taking the notification in his hands. Charlotte, Hope said. She heads the legal department at the firm. She has a license to handle cases. I think she can help us. Besides, we don't need to tell her our story. Nicholas sat down next to the girl. Listen, I looked in the bathroom after you yesterday and... Hope looked at the man in fear, not knowing what to say. And I found a test there. You're pregnant. Hope nodded. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you'd be against it." A soft kiss interrupted the girl. She hugged the man and smiled broadly. "So you're not against it?" The happy smile and mischievous eyes of the man gave a better answer than any words. He hugged the girl tightly and held her close. "If that scoundrel ever tries to sue you for half of the property, I don't care. We won't be left with nothing. We'll have our house, our fields, our child, and ourselves. We'll have each other." Hope closed her eyes and took a deep breath, but when she opened them, Nicholas saw the look that had once scared the detective. It was a determined and unshakable look. "He's going to court, to take what belongs to me by blood, but he'll leave with nothing. I'll take not only what's mine, but everything he has. He'll be left with nothing." The court date was soon, as if the universe itself wanted to get this strange case over with as quickly as possible. Charlotte became Hope's solicitor. Nicholas supported the girl from the witness stand, as did many of the villagers. The judge was a tall, red-haired woman with a stern look. She listened to the plaintiff David's statement with boredom, asking him clarifying questions that he couldn't always answer. It seemed to amuse her. The plaintiff's witnesses were Eleanor, David's neighbors, and his friends. Eleanor went on and on, as if it were her last time on stage, putting on a full dramatic performance. "I was so scared when my dear Hope, when she had her stroke. I didn't sleep for 3 nights, waiting for news from the hospital." Tears streamed from the woman's eyes. She wiped them with a white handkerchief and continued, "And when I saw Hope, I almost had a heart attack myself. She wasn't moving. She was almost lifeless. I had to look after her while my David was at work. I cleaned up after her, fed her, and now she wasn't even sick. The worst thing that could ever happen has already happened to me. Me and my son have been betrayed and deceived, and now they want to leave us with nothing." Eleanor cried again and sat back on the bench. After her speech, the judge seemed to get into the case and listened to the other witnesses with interest. "Your Honor, you should not believe the words of the plaintiff and his witnesses. Let's start with the fact that the defendant has evidence of the plaintiff's infidelity. The recording has been submitted to the court." The recording of Lily and David's conversation blared through the courtroom. Then the detective testified about the plaintiff's relationship. "Lies!" Eleanor jumped up from the bench, but after a warning from the judge, she sat back down. She seemed deeply hurt by the slander. "Furthermore, I want to point out that the defendant did not deceive the plaintiff in writing. She only pretended to be sick to test him. No medical certificates were provided. The doctor only told the patient's diagnosis to the plaintiff and his mother verbally. Also, the plaintiff's side claims that they cared for the sick defendant," Charlotte continued. "However, I have a recording of a conversation between Mrs. Eleanor Lyons and her son. I'd like to play it. David, I fed. Oh, I was so engrossed in my book, I completely forgot. But it's okay. She can wait until lunch. She won't lose weight. Have you found a carer for her? Good. The main thing is that she takes a small amount of money and it doesn't matter that she drinks. The doctor said she wouldn't last long anyway." The recording stopped, and the courtroom gasped in surprise. Charlotte continued, "Furthermore, the plaintiff has filed a request for the division of the following property: a residential house at 8 Repin Street, Ilinskaya Village, and also the income from the fields of the Golden Birch Farm, which were indeed bought by Mrs. Hope Lyons, the defendant, but this property was transferred to the full ownership of Mr. Nicholas Gorloff a week before the lawsuit was filed. Therefore, the property was acquired during the marriage and transferred also during the marriage, which means the plaintiff cannot demand its division. The remaining money in the defendant's personal account and the share in the estate in Germany are part of the inheritance, which the plaintiff also has no right to claim." The judge smiled. She did it almost imperceptibly, but Hope could have sworn she looked at David with a hint of joy. To transfer the property to Nicholas's ownership, she had to work hard and find a corrupt solicitor who finalized the deal retroactively. It had helped the case immensely. "Well then, in this case, the lawsuit is considered invalid," the judge asked Charlotte. "The lawsuit of David Lyons is aimed at the equal division of property between the former spouses, but this is not only the defendant's property, but also the plaintiff's own property, namely a 3-bedroom flat at 30 Pegasova Street, a BMW, and the money in the joint account of the plaintiff and the defendant." "I object." David's solicitor, a plump old man with a bald head and round glasses, jumped up from his seat. The flat is an inheritance from the plaintiff's father. Correct, Charlotte nodded. But according to the law, if one spouse makes significant changes to the other spouse's property, it can be recognized as joint property. And what significant changes were made? The solicitor asked. Your Honor, you will now see photos of the flat before its renovation. As you can see, it's in a decent condition. This was exactly 1 year after the wedding. And here are photos of the flat after the renovation, 6 months later. How can you prove this was done with the defendant's money? Firstly, in the period from September to April, when the renovation was taking place, the plaintiff was not working, and judging by the bank statement, there wasn't enough money in his personal account. Furthermore, the testimony of the foreman of the renovation team has been submitted to the court, stating that the contract was signed by the defendant. The solicitors argued for a long time, calling witnesses and trying to prove their point of view. But soon, the judge left to deliver the verdict. She returned with a large red folder. All rise, the court is in session, the judge's assistant said. The court has decided to satisfy the plaintiff's claim. The property of David Lyons will be divided between him and his spouse. A third of the flat goes to the defendant, the car becomes joint property, and 50% of the money from the plaintiff's account is transferred to the ownership of Hope Lyons. The court's decision has been made and is not subject to appeal. The sound of the gavel settled everything. David and Eleanor looked at Hope, who was being hugged by Nicholas with anger and hatred. Charlotte, smiling broadly, joined them. I told you we would take everything from him, the girl said in a slightly strange, even obsessed voice. It's rightfully yours, Nicholas said. Not his, yours. Do you understand? Now we have everything we dreamed of, the man smiled. All that's left is to have a child and a full house, Charlotte said, gathering her papers. Well, Hope said, and looked at her stomach. Charlotte smiled. That was fast. Will you make me the godmother? Do we have a choice? Nicholas asked. No, Hope smiled and hugged the two most important people in her life again. Now she knew everything would be fine. I hope this helps you out. If you need any edits or want to explore a different direction for the story, just let me know. And of course, if you plan to share this, remember to ask viewers to subscribe, comment, and like the video at the end. Good luck.